It was a chilly autumn evening when I decided to visit the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The place always held a strange allure for me, something about the way the headstones leaned into each other, casting long shadows under the fading light. That night, the wind howled softly, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. The idea came on a whim. Bring a radio, listen to some music, maybe catch a local broadcast. It seemed like a way to stave off the loneliness that had crept into my life lately. The radio I brought was an old, battered model with a tuning dial, the kind that crackled when you turned it. I set it on a crumbling headstone and leaned back, letting the static fill the air around me. For a while, it played an old jazz station, the music a soft hum beneath the rustling trees. But then the signal began to waver. The jazz faded, replaced by the eerie hiss of static. I fiddled with the dial, trying to find the station again, but the needle seemed to have a mind of its own. The frequencies shifted erratically, jumping from one station to another, snippets of voices and music blending into a chaotic symphony. It was then that I heard a voice breaking through the static, low and strained. "Help me." I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. The voice was faint, distorted, as if struggling to reach through layers of static and time. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to pinpoint the signal, but the voice kept slipping away, buried beneath the hiss and crackle. I adjusted the antenna, moving it slowly, and the voice grew clearer, though still distant. "They buried me wrong." My breath caught in my throat. The air around me seemed to grow colder, the wind biting through my jacket. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing among the gravestones, but there was only darkness. The radio continued its maddening dance through the frequencies, and the voice came again, more urgent. "They don't know I'm still here." A chill ran down my spine. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial back and forth, trying to make sense of the words. It was as if the radio had tapped into a different world, a place where voices lingered long after they should have been silent. I could almost hear the desperation in the tone, a raw, rasping sound that clawed its way out of the ether. I called out into the darkness, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" The radio crackled, the voice wavering. For a moment, there was silence, as if the unseen speaker had paused to listen to me. Then it returned, softer now, as if confiding a terrible secret. "John Garrett, they left me alone." I felt a shudder pass through me. The name echoed in my mind, unfamiliar yet somehow filled with a heavy weight. I scanned the nearby headstones with my flashlight, but the names blurred under the beam. My pulse quickened as I realized that whoever or whatever was speaking through the radio was buried somewhere nearby. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The radio whined, the frequencies distorting, and then the voice spoke again, each word slow and deliberate. "Find me. They can't hear me. I'm trapped." A burst of static filled the air and the voice was gone. I spun the dial frantically, but all I heard was the empty hiss of the radio waves. I sat there for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. It felt like the darkness around me was pressing closer, the shadows deeper, the cold more biting. I grabbed the radio and fled the cemetery, not daring to look back. Back home, I tried to shake off the feeling that clung to me like cobwebs. I sat down at my computer and typed the name into the search bar. John Garrett. A list of articles and obituaries appeared, but one link caught my eye. It was a local news story from nearly a decade ago, titled "Tragic Death at Hollowbrook Cemetery." My hand hovered over the mouse before I clicked on it, a sense of dread unfurling in my gut. The article described a man named John Garrett who had gone missing in the woods near the cemetery. His body was discovered weeks later, buried in an unmarked grave near the edge of the grounds. But there was something off about the story. According to the report, the coroner found signs that Garrett had been buried alive. Scratches on the inside of the casket, his fingers worn down to the bone. The authorities had dismissed it as a tragic accident, a case of mistaken death, but the locals whispered that it was something else, something darker. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details, each line more horrifying than the last. The memory of that voice on the radio echoed in my mind, and a sickening realization settled over me. It wasn't just a coincidence. Garrett's spirit, his voice had somehow reached out to me from that lonely grave. I shut my laptop and tried to calm my racing thoughts, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a prickling at the back of my neck. I turned the radio back on, hoping to drown out the silence, but as I adjusted the dial, it returned to Garrett's voice, barely more than a whisper, slipping through the static. "You found me, but they still don't. Listen." The radio cut out, leaving me in the dark with a hum of dead air. My mind raced with questions. What did he mean? Who was they? But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had happened to Garrett wasn't just a mistake. And now his presence clung to me as if he had crossed some invisible threshold. Over the next few days, the radio's behavior grew even stranger. I'd hear faint whispers at odd hours, and once in the middle of the night, it turned on by itself, filling the room with a low, mournful hum. I tried to get rid of it, tossing it into the trash, but the next morning I found it back on my porch, the dial set to a station that didn't exist. The whispers continued, blending with my own thoughts until I couldn't tell where they ended, and I began. One night, as I lay in bed, the voice returned, louder than before, filling my room with its desperate plea. "Please, they're coming for you, like they did for me." A shadow moved across the room, just beyond the edge of my vision. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the faint hum of the radio and Garrett's voice, growing fainter with every passing second as if something was pulling him away. "You can't escape." The radio fell silent, and I was left alone with the darkness and my own racing heartbeat. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning I was determined to find answers. I drove back to the cemetery, the roads winding through the misty woods, but when I arrived, I found the area near Garrett's supposed grave disturbed. Fresh earth, as if something or someone had recently clawed its way out. I turned back to my car, every nerve screaming for me to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard it again, Garrett's voice, not from the radio this time, but from the shadows between the trees. "They're coming, and now they know your name too." The shadows shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something moving in the mist, a figure with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in silent agony. I drove away as fast as I could, but the sense of being followed never left me. Now, even far from that cursed place, I still hear the voice on the edge of every broadcast, whispering to me from the spaces between the stations. And sometimes, late at night when the radio crackles to life on its own, I hear other voices joining Garrett's voices that seem to know me, calling my name with a terrible familiarity. I know that one day the static will swallow me too, just like it did with him. And when it does, I'll be the one reaching out, begging for someone to hear me.